I know I'm glazing the bracket system a lot. I think it's actually not where it needs to be, though. I think the breakdown is just not a good breakdown of what we see commonly in games of Magic. These are not new formats. We're not building events that are only bracket 2 or only bracket 3, right? Like, we're trying to get people to understand that when they sit down at a table, they should be discussing these points and putting their decks into brackets to help people understand what they should play.
Hello and welcome to the Herald's Horn. On today's interview segment, I am joined by Cass, also known as Strix. She is an article writer for Cool Stuff Inc. and an all-around content creator as well, who is extremely passionate about Magic the Gathering and also is really interested in exploring some of the dynamics around, all of the social pressures and all that kind of stuff that exist within Commander games. She a while ago wrote a little pros and cons article about fast mana in Commander, how it ends up kind of working out at tables, how people feel about it, how people feel poorly about it, positively about it. And we started off our conversation talking about that in the light of now, well, most of that fast mana being on the new Gamechangers list. As the conversation goes on, we talk more broadly about the effects that we think that the Gamechanger system and the bracket system may have on Commander going forward. And we also talk a little bit writer to writer about writing about Magic the Gathering, some of our favorite things about it, what we didn't expect, all that kind of stuff. It's a great conversation. Let's get into it. Once again, want to note real quick that for whatever reason, I'm having some trouble with my recording solutions. My audio on this one is not great. Some pretty heavy distortion. It sounds like I have a lisp the entire time. So apologies for that. I did my best to fix it up, but there's only so much you can do. Hope you still appreciate this conversation. Thanks.
And welcome in today in the Horn. I'm joined by Cass. I've already introduced him. Cass, welcome. Thank you for joining me here on the Herald's Horn.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about Magic stuff, which I do a lot.
Talk about Magic stuff a lot, unprompted.
Unprompted.
People walk up to you and you say, "Hey, have you heard the good word?"
I posted about how my toxic trait is talking about Magic to people who have no idea what it is and trying to subtly get them into the game. Have you heard the good word of Magic the Gathering, like you were saying?
How often does that work out for you? Have you creeded a lot of converts? No, it doesn't work at all. You're like,
I feel like Magic
100.
is a tough sell. It's a tough sell. You have to read every single card a million times and you still don't understand the stack. And I'm trying to get you to play.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I get that. Magic does appeal to a very specific subsection of nerd, and then maybe still not all of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I've tried. I see a person, they have a Zelda pin. I'm like, hey, do you want to talk about Magic the Gathering? No, please. Just Zelda. Got it.
Please get away from me. Please.
I approach people at the grocery store.
Hey, nice Zelda pin. Do you play Magic the Gathering?
I'm like, stereotyping people. I'm like, please.
I just want someone to play with, please. So, Cass, you are a Magic the Gathering writer, Magic the Gathering player, obviously. If you're proselytizing to the masses, big Magic the Gathering fan in general. I wanted to bring you on the Horn today to have a little conversation. Specifically, I know that you have written an article in the past about fast mana in Commander that I know that you were proud of and you liked. I gave it a read. I gave it a read. I liked it a lot. But you did write this article about playing fast mana in Commander before our new Gamechangers system, before the bracket system. Well, first of all, actually, let's start. The listeners probably have not read this article, or maybe they have. Hopefully they have. But could you give our listeners kind of the overall gist of what your thoughts were in this article about playing fast mana and rituals and that kind of stuff in Commander? What's the gist?
So high level, it's basically just discussing that what fast mana is, which is basically like accelerants, like, Mana Crypt, Soul Ring, Jeweled Lotus, stuff that really you pay very little to get tons of acceleration on your turn and on future turns. It's a little different from rituals, which I get into in the article. But basically what the article is about is what are the pros and cons of this? A lot of people are having rule zero conversations about what they want to play against. And fast mana is one of those conversations. I basically talk about why people feel that this should or shouldn't be included in decks that they play against and how that factors into power scaling when we discuss Rule Zero. In the end, I kind of just discuss how I feel that this is like a very powerful thing you can do in Magic. And when talking about power levels, it's something that must be discussed. If you are running a ton of fast mana, that's going to influence how readily you can win the game. And we should talk about it, but I don't think that it's necessarily something that should be pulled out of the game. Post ban, it's like very, very touchy to really discuss how, whether or not it should have been banned, which I touch upon in the article.
Because it is very interesting that like basically 2 of our 3 or maybe 2 of our 4 best forms of fast mana were removed from the format not that long ago in Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt. Black-Side Extortionist could maybe also be considered some kind of fast mana, maybe a ritual, a little different, but
I think when we look at like why they banned it and not Soul Ring, a lot of people get touchy. The thing is that Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus and Soul Ring together are like the craziest thing that you could possibly do. In the article, I talk about how much mana it can produce on turn 1 and how backbreaking it can be to be against someone who manages to get. It's the same thing with Mana Crypt into Jeweled Lotus, into first land of turn, into Soul Ring, into a 7, mana single color commander.
That's 7 mana on turn 1, and then on turn 2, if you like. You've already cracked your Jeweled Lotus, but you untap, play a land, that's still like 6 mana. That's insane.
Yes. Which against anyone else, most people are just playing their Arcane Signet and passing, right? Maybe if you're lucky, if your first land was a blue, you can maybe counter the Jeweled Lotus or something, but that's crazy. It's like absolutely insane. So I think the conversation shouldn't be whether or not these things are absolutely backbreaking. Like I think no one disagrees with that. I think whether or not it should be banned is a whole other situation in terms of like how players feel about whether or not we should be allowed to do that.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess that's like the conversation that has to be had when you want to play fast mana in a commander game and all that kind of stuff. And something I thought was pretty interesting, reading your article and then like looking at the Gamechanger list, there is fast mana on the Gamechanger list. There's Ancient Tomb is kind of a form of fast mana as a land. Yeah. It goes +1, a soul land, named after Soul Ring. Chrome Mox is a type of fast mana that's very card inefficient. Grim Monolith is like a burst and also a combo piece. Oh wait, sorry, no, that's Basalt Monolith. My bad. Grim Monolith, a burst. Mox Diamond, also very card inefficient, and Mana Vault, also a one-time burst. Much akin to Grim Monolith, could maybe almost be considered a little bit more like a ritual, etc.
Yes. Yeah.
I was personally very surprised that there wasn't any, as far as the brackets go, I was very surprised, at least as far as like kind of the bullet points that they offered and all that kind of stuff, that there was no guidance related to fast mana. The no 2-card infinites, no mass land denial, and extra turns and game changers and that kind of stuff was the kind of stuff they were focusing on. I guess now that I'm thinking about it more than a second, I guess the only fast mana left that isn't on the Game Changer list is just Soul Ring.
I think
I've talked myself through the problem.
I don't need to be here. You're solving it on your own.
I've come to the conclusion that never mind.
I think though, you're bringing up a very interesting point. This beta is supposed to be long, like have a long history moving forward, right? And there is a possibility that some of the things that were banned initially become unbanned and become game changers. So it's interesting that in the brackets, in the initial discussion about it, we're not talking about fast mana enough. A lot of the fast mana that is discussed are not particularly outstanding, and they are usually combo pieces. They're usually really good in certain situations, not particularly good in others, right? I think though that gives us a little bit of insight on how they feel about these bans, maybe. And maybe I'm just pulling from the ether, but I think that it's kind of this idea that fast mana, and I talk about this in the article, fast mana is colorless, so it's very versatile. You can play it in any deck. Certain color combinations have skills and strengths, and being able to throw in fast mana into any deck, right, makes that more linear in play. It eliminates certain colors. It's kind of why I think in CEDH we don't see a ton of green, because you can ramp in colorless so well and so much faster that you don't need the green to splash to ramp. You could do it with like the Mox, the Crypt, the Ancient Tomb. You can do it with other things, right?
When those are the options, even taking off a turn to cast something that is objectively as powerful as Llanowar Elves or whatever can feel a little embarrassing.
It's a very different world. And I think that with the Gamechanger bracket, I think they were just kind of saying, as of right now, fast mana is not the biggest issue. I think the bigger issue is the 2 card combos and the Gamechangers are more impactful to players that are not necessarily new players, not ones that are opening their first like Magic pre-con, but like people who have played long enough to understand the conversation about power levels.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that kind of does do a good job of solving the problem, at least when it kind of comes to fast mana? Do you think it helps? Do you think it's good enough?
This is tough because my opinion keeps changing. I keep listening to people and my thoughts have evolved a lot. Initially, I even wrote an article recently that came out last week that were about the pros and cons of the bracket. And I think that, moving things around, like the first thing is that it's a beta, right? Like they need feedback. They don't know all the things that we know because quite literally there are a limited amount of people. We're an entire community of people who play a ton of Magic. We're going to know the flaws a little bit better than them. No offense. They were just in terms of numbers.
The collective us can come up with theoretically more problems with the system than 20 people can. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And some of these are I don't want to say invalid, but they don't necessarily affect as many people as people think they do. I think that overall the concept of it, the things that they brought up in the brackets are things that we discuss in power level conversations. Before, when we used to say my deck is a 7, we would say whether or not it has tons of tutors. We would talk about whether or not it had quote unquote game changers without the word game changers. We would say I have a Gaia's Cradle. People would say that. They would disclose that, right? People are still having the same conversation. It's just that now there is an official ruling, an official place for people to get that language to discuss their stuff.
Yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, probably is pretty helpful, at least as a starting point. Because, like, I don't know, apparently there was a problem with the way that things used to be. I personally never had a problem with it because I just told people what my deck did and they were fine. No, kidding. But no, obviously it's been a problem for a long time. People have been talking about how, especially Magic the Gathering commander play in untrusted spaces, to use the similar term, i.e. at a MagicCon, so on and so forth. If listener, you are not really familiar with that is, you know, a lot of people talk about the concept of trusted play versus untrusted play when it comes to Commander. Trusted play is playing Commander with your regular Tuesday night beer and Commander group at your house on your dining room table, and you all have an intrinsic understanding of what you're all going to do, and you all kind of have to care about each other's feelings because you're going to be there again next Tuesday, and you would like to like each other when you get together for your next game, right? Whereas untrusted play is the venue that a lot of people, honestly, until very recently, myself included, basically only get the chance to play the game, get to play Commander, which may be showing up at your local game store, and you get put into games with people who you are maybe acquaintances with or you don't know at all. And maybe you'll get to know them eventually, but right now, you know, you don't know them and you very well may never play with them again. Cass and I were just at MagicCon Chicago. There was a lot of quote unquote untrusted Commander games happening all weekend long. The command zone was like 14 by 12 tables. Yeah. And it was packed all of Saturday and Sunday. It was insane. which really just puts into light how much they missed the mark on the amount of tables they had for Magic on Chicago last year. But I won't get into that. I won't talk about that.
I'm so glad I finally figured out that there was a downstairs where you could play, because I was like, how can I came to play Magic.
This free play zone is a little small. I mean, I get it, but downstairs in the forbidden pea yellow zone, you could play Magic the Gathering downstairs.
I felt like I was in Avernus. I felt like I descended into Avernus when I went down there. It's crazy.
Anyways, where was I going with this? So I think the brackets are, I like a lot of what they're doing, and I think they do go a good way towards helping create a bare minimum framework for people to work off of. Do I think that some of the specifications for the brackets could be a little more well-defined or scoot around a little bit? Yes, sure. But I think it's a great start. It is very funny to me that like a lot of the pivotal number is kind of like 2, and 2 is like your average pre-constructed deck currently. Those are pretty dang good. The current precon is pretty dang good.
Yeah, have you seen Bello? Oh my God. Someone brings out a Bello precon, I'm bringing out my bracket 4. Like, I got you.
Exactly. Better than most of the decks that I'm brewing up, that's for sure. Holy.
Yeah.
Oh no. Oh no. Lippy drive down. Come on, buddy. Come on, but all right, please hold.
Did you lose your train of thought?
Always, Cass. Always. Same as it ever was. I do think, going back to Fast Mana, which is kind of where we started the conversation in regards to the new bracket system and Gamechangers and stuff, it is very interesting to me that basically all Fast Mana sans Soul Ring is relegated to the Gamechanger list, which I do think accidentally kind of really changes some of the dynamics of some of the lower power levels, because like you said, in CDH we basically have no incentive, I can just say incentive to play. I'm a writer, hire me, I'm available. We have little to no incentive to play green, because green's greatest strength is ramping and a real big guys. We don't really care about the rate at which it ramps in CDH, and we don't care about big guys in CDH as much. But in lower power levels, I have always felt that like green is kind of accidentally the strongest color, because in the big dumb stuff format, one of the best things you can do is like turn 1 Eleanor L for Birds of Paradise or whatever, into turn 2 cultivate to make sure you put out more lands, and you're gonna hit your next land drop, and then like suddenly you have 5-6 mana, and your opponent who's playing mountains says, cool, I'm gonna play my second mountain,
and I'm gonna pass the turn and hope for the best.
I'm gonna play my Arcane Signet. This is kind of embarrassing.
The thing is that I love that you touched on this, because I think that green, in the distinction between high powered like bracket 4 and CDH is completely different formats, right? In terms of the game. I think that bracket 4, I think the color that reigns true is green. Green is good at just about everything and more, right? Like, it's just overall, you have to splash it for ramp. You have to splash it. It can graveyard recur. It can make big guys for low mana cost. On top of that, it's just really good at drawing in situations, right? Like, it's just good. It's all around good. It goes into CDH and it gets demolished by combos. It gets demolished by fast mana. It gets demolished by a lot of different stuff. And I have been trying to keep up. I watch like some CDH stuff, like, play to win. And I've seen that without these fast mana pieces, there is a little bit of a gap, but it's still combo central. And that's the thing that I think green lacks, is combo centricity. I think it just struggles with that. But I think that in that distinction, the brackets do a good job of saying CDH is a different thing, and high power bracket 4 is different. I know I'm glazing the bracket system a lot. I think it's actually not where it needs to be, though. I think the breakdown is just not a good breakdown of what we see commonly in games of Magic. I'm not seeing stuff below a 2. I'm not seeing stuff that, and the chasm between 3 and 4 is enormous, right? like bracket 3 decks and bracket 4 decks are so different in terms of what you can see in terms of like diversity. And it doesn't account for a lot of interesting combo pieces, unique to archetype combo pieces, right? It can't really do that. It's not capable of itemizing, 30,000 cards over the 30 years of Magic. But I think that this is some of the complaints that people had.
Is it some of the complaints that you have?
I think my complaint is not the itemization. I think that the bracket picture is misunderstood often. There's a blurb under each like bracket that tells you what it's supposed to be in flavor. I am not going to say that my bracket 4 deck is a bracket 2 just because it doesn't run a ton of game changers.
It doesn't hit the specific exact blurb or whatever.
I think it's not a checklist. It's basically an idea of like what you should be looking for to discuss. You should still be using your best judgment when deciding your decks. You shouldn't be. I was talking to another author, Levi at the Thought Vessel, and we were talking about whether or not people should be bracket angling, right? Which is trying to build the strongest bracket 1 deck or the weakest bracket 4 deck based on the criteria. And I think that misunderstands the point. These are not new formats. We're not building events that are only bracket 2 or only bracket 3, right? Like we're trying to get people to understand that when they sit down at a table, they should be discussing these points and putting their decks into brackets to help people understand what they should play. If someone says my Savala Heart of the Wilds deck is a bracket 2 based on what's in it, but that that's a bracket 4 deck, we're not doing justice to the system.
Yeah, it's like, okay, there's technically no game changers in here, and technically I don't chain any extra turns, and technically I don't have any 2-card infinite combos, and technically there's no mass land denial. So I call this a 2.
Yeah, and then you win on turn 3 consistently.
And I think that's the kicker. I think that's the kicker. This still won't solve for the people who sat down at the table and they said, "Oh yeah, this is my chill deck," and it's not chill, right?
Yeah, people are going to lie. This system doesn't go into people's brains and make them not lie. It just gives people with good faith the tools in which to discuss it, and it's more a tool for people who just don't have the language.
Yep, and I think like, if anything, as we develop more tools, as more tools are developed to help people play more Commander games, I think slowly at the same time, while these tools help people out, I think that also like Sheldon's and the older RC's opinions of like, actually, this should be as simple as possible and people can figure it out, also get like validated at the same time, because the solutions for a lot of these problems are increasingly complex and increasingly somehow both objective and more vibe-based systems at the same time. And in order to be able to participate within those more and more complex systems, you do have to be more and more involved and have more and more of an understanding of how the system is supposed to work, which is like accidentally the problem that the bracket system has already run into. Like a lot of people, their only introduction to the bracket beta has basically been the graphic that Wizards put out and the list of game changers. And the graphic that Wizards put out does a pretty good job of telling you the extremely high level stuff, which is actually all explained in very in-depth detail in a very long article that Wizards published at the same time that they came out with the bracket. And it's tough when a system doesn't work as well as it's supposed to, when most people are just by accident or whatever only able to interact with it at that very like basal level. Like,
I agree.
You have to be I think you have to be a pretty invested Commander player at this point to see the bracket beta in the first place. And then you have to be so much higher level of an investment player to be like, I bet Wizards of the Coast wrote way more about this somewhere. I should go read about the full intentions of the bracket system.
Yeah, that's the tough thing, is that the visual is it's like, even though it's simple, it's so specific that you would think that's all, right? And a lot of people are getting it passed around through social media, on Blue Sky, on Instagram, on TikTok. And like you said, that's all they're seeing. They're not stopping their long game of Magic to be like, I need to double check this long article that Wizards put out to see whether or not my brackets are accurate. And then with Moxfield and EDH Rec, just like putting those brackets deeply into the fabric of the stuff that we use, people are still not getting the details. And I don't blame players for that. And I don't blame Wizards necessarily for the graphic. I think that it was meant to be an assistive sort of thing. They did a whole video. They did an article. I think though, if a person just sees the graphic, they're going to have feelings about it. And I think that it's hard to parse that. It's hard to say, these feelings are not valid based on what you've seen. But for people who have seen the rest of it, they're like, there is more to it, right? We can pass that on. But I think if you just see the bracket system, it's still somewhat helpful, even though it's definitely not where it should be. It doesn't have enough game changers. And in the idea of sitting down with a new player and being like, before we play, look at this list of cards. Have you heard of any of them? Are they in your deck? I need to know before we play. It's like crazy.
Definitely. And I do got to shout out the GOAT, Rachel Weeks. She did put a lot of work into making a new updated like image, which does contain a lot more like helpful information about the vibe and stuff that was all communicated in the article and the video and all that kind of stuff into basically the same size image, but there's just way more information tastefully put in it. Which
I haven't seen this. I'm all over it. I'm like obsessed with Rachel Weeks. Yeah. She was the only creator that I got in line and to get something signed for. No offense to everyone else, but I love Rachel Weeks so much. So I haven't seen this. I'm surprised. I'll look at it after this.
Yeah, I just sent it to you on Blue Sky. You can check it out later. I sent you a post, but yeah, she basically designed like a same like bracket and all that kind of stuff, but she basically just like put in a lot of like the exhibition. I want to show off my casual themed deck. Decks prioritize theme over function. They often have a goal outside of winning. Anything from showcasing an under-supported mechanic to a favorite artist. And then like the little list of no game changers, no mass landed out.
I love that.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, or 3, upgraded. I like strong cards and I'm ready for battle. Decks are thoughtfully designed, powered up by synergy and additional card quality. Players may expect the game to end out of nowhere with powerful spells and some combos, and then the 0 to 3 game changers, no mass. So like, there's more vibe description of each bracket, which I do think helps a lot because so many people saw that original bracket image and they were like, oh, so all of my decks are objectively a 2. No.
Yeah. No. And the thing is that the original one has the blurb, and the amount of people who, like, I used to be an English teacher for 8 years. If you do not highlight, underline, bold, the thing that says read the instructions, no one's going to read the instructions. They're just going to go immediately to the bullets, the numbers. They're going to be like, oh, this is a list. And I think that that's what happened. People were not reading that blurb. I think Magic New Girl put it great in her video where she's just like, I don't think people are reading the blurbs. And I was like, I think you're right.
Yeah. And that is I think that is too just part of the danger of introducing somewhat of a more objective system into something that has historically been so vibes-based, because while we are trying to create these more objective systems to help people figure things out, there is always still just going to be major elements of subjectivity that we are going to have to figure out together. And that's not a flaw of the bracket system. That's a flaw of we as people are trying to play a multiplayer game where the end goal is not entirely winning. It's also for us to like have an enjoyable time together where we all end up happy at the end is the ideal. And we are all bringing 100% custom built 100 card singleton decks.
Yeah, the interaction. The reason I play Magic is because no 2 games are the same. And now we're trying to create a system on how to discuss effectively what a game is going to look like. And it's just like, no, we can't do that. Like you said, it's a singleton format. There are 30,000 cards. This game has been going on for a million years. Each card interacts differently. We can't even shuffle our decks the same way, like in a reasonable situation, right? Everything's going to be different. And I think that people are like, well, we should be able to solve this super perfectly with a bow. And I was like, no, it's still vibes based. We're just giving you a framework so that we can vibe a little better than we did before.
Yep. So I want to change gears here slightly, very slightly, going back to fast mana a little bit here. So now that we have the Game Changer list, how do you think the vibes would be of like, this is something they have kind of already not said would happen, but they have said that unbanned cards, they're a lot more comfortable unbanning cards now that they know that they have a place to put them. And most, if not all, unbanned cards would go into the Game Changer list. It does feel like, outside of the weird issues related to people losing and then gaining a ton of money, it feels like, since we have cards, all of the fast mana except for Soul Ring pretty much now on the Game Changer list, how would you feel about like Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus coming off of the banned list and going onto the Game Changer list? How are the vibes of that?
So
would it be weird?
I think I actually talked with my partner about this. We got into it about this like a couple days ago. So this is really tough because it's not just a question about whether or not it deserves to be on the Game Changers list. If there were no death threats, there were no weirdness about it, and they banned these cards and everyone was cool about it, I would say absolutely they should go on a Game Changer list. I would say put them on there. They're better there than they are anywhere else. The purpose of banning these cards was because it streamlined play and it made it unfun for people who were not able to bracket into the right sort of play with someone. It was CEDH cards with casual play. Then it should go immediately. I think, though. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say I think that I incidentally, like, if they had never been banned, they probably just would be on the Game Changer list now, or maybe Jeweled Lotus wouldn't be, but whatever. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, you're good. I think it's a little bit different, and it's like weirdly social when it comes to how we handled the rules committee afterwards. I think that it's tough when people make a mistake like they did and they hurt people, and so much so that they're threatening people's lives, and it moved to a situation where they can no longer do that job in good conscience, and it had to move to WotC to take over it. It creates a very weird precedent that people can be vitriolic and awful to people and get what they want. Oh, we created a Game Changers list. We harassed a bunch of people and I got my dockside back. That I feel does not feel good, right? It doesn't feel good. I think honestly, and I think this is an important point. I don't think that we should be judging what goes on a Game Changer list based on stuff outside of Magic. So I understand why people would want to put these things on a Game Changer list and unban them. But at the same time, Magic is a game, and that was people's lives. And I think that's slightly more important, that we set a precedent that you can't just harass people into getting your cards unbanned. And this new format doesn't change anything. I think eventually they should go on to become unbanned, but not so close to the time where people are still recovering this year from how people reacted. And I don't say this lightly, but I love Magic more than anything. Like, you're going to ask me what my hobbies are outside of Magic, and I have to really think about that because that's all I do.
That's a very common refrain for my question for guests for the year for the Patreon. Yeah.
Yeah. But the thing for me is that it's still a game, and people's lives are more valuable than that. And I'm willing to take the L and not be able to play Dockside, or I play a Tivit deck. I need a Jeweled Lotus. I know what it's like to lose that card, right? And I'm like, I understand them banning it for a period of time, just in the idea that we need to learn that we need to be sensible as players. These cards are not more important than people's lives. Your $300 Mana Crypt is not more important than killing someone, you know?
Yep, definitely. Well, Cass, I think that makes a lot of sense. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, it's tough.
Yep. It is such a strange situation that we are in now, which is just like, yeah, there's so much social stuff outside of the game when it comes to these cards because of the reactions that were caused, and a lot of the
financials. Like people spent a lot of money.
The financial stuff is nuts. I forget who, but someone I follow on Twitter pretty much like made a very convincing case that it was like the most disastrous day in like financial losses in Magic history or whatever. Like, not exactly close. Well, it's, a $70 card and a $150 card and a $60 card, and everyone had a ton of them, and all of a sudden they're all gone. Suddenly they're not worthless. But so Cass, I was gonna change gears here a little bit, but I was gonna pick your brain about being a writer here a little bit. But before we shift that way, is there anything other closing thoughts? Anything else you wanted to share about the brackets, the game changers? How you think no one should ever play any fast mana ever? No, I'm kidding.
I feel like all I have to say is that WotC listens to people, right? And I think that if we approach them in a sensible way, they will try to figure out a way to like harness that information for good. And I think that we should just keep giving advice. We should keep trying to talk about this. I know that we've had these conversations a million times since they happened, but it's like healthy for the community for us to discuss this stuff.
Definitely. So thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, Cass. I wanted to transition here a little bit to writing about Magic the Gathering. I have rarely, if ever, had someone else on the show who writes about Magic the Gathering fairly consistently, except for, of course, Emma, who writes about Magic the Gathering and edits Magic the Gathering for a living. But you have been writing pretty consistently. It's like what, weekly, bi-weekly for Cool Stuff Inc.
Once a week.
Since like mid 2024. So it's been about 8 or 9 months now.
Yeah,
I can do basic math. How did that happen? What are we doing here? How'd you get into the game? Not the Magic game, the game of writing about Magic. You know, that's where'd it come from? What makes you passionate about it? How'd you start? All that kind of stuff. You said you were an English teacher, so I assume you've been writing stuff for a while.
Yes. So my bachelor's is in creative writing. And I used to edit at the Florida Review and the Cypress Dome Society at UCF. I got into writing for Magic because I'm like every Magic player there ever was, and I think that my takes about Magic are the best. I wanted to share those. I have to
share this with someone. They have to listen.
What are the best board wipes in Magic? If it's not Toxic Deluge, you're wrong. You know, so I saw an ad, Cool Stuff says looking for writers, and I was just like, oh, there's no shot I get this. There's tons of people who want to write. There's tons of people who are writers. And my first article was about vanilla creatures. I wanted to write an article about Yargle and Multani. I just wanted to find a way to write an article about them. So I wrote my first article, I submitted it, and they were like, we really like this. We want to see more stuff. And they're like, can you expand to like technical stuff? And I was like, oh, absolutely. And my second article was about how to get around protection. Cause I had played against a lot of people who are like, oh, it has protection. I can't interact with it. Yes, you can. There's a lot of ways to interact with it. So I created my own, you know how people talk about protection, they say debt. I created an acronym called MUSES, which is how to get out of protection. And I threw in a lot of cards, a lot of ways. Basically, it's -1/-1 counters to keep it really simple. So I started writing those articles.
You cast Toxic Deluge, the best board wiping commander.
I'm telling you, this board wipe it's insane. Toxic Deluge is the best board wipe. I have an article about it. Go read it. Basically, that's how I got into it. I started writing articles. I would write them every week. I would play my games. I usually get inspired for articles after Friday Night Magic. Someone will do something and I'll be like, I need to go talk to the internet about this. And that's how I started writing them.
Cool. Yeah, that's awesome. I find that there's a very common motivator behind many people who write about Magic, make stuff about Magic in general, but especially writing about Magic. There's a lot of the act of writing about Magic leaves a lot of time and space for like purposely thinking and developing an argument and then getting to make sure it's presented in the best light and preempting what you think people might say against your argument and, you know, really get to lay it out. We're like in a video format on a podcast like this, it's really just coming out. I've thought about these things. Obviously, I have some amount of premeditation, but in the moment, who knows what's going to happen?
Who knows what I'm going to say? I'm not in control. This is wild.
I'm just yapping. But, you know, I am not surprised to hear you say that at all. And, you know, I like your work. I've been reading your stuff. I like your work. And I am always appreciative of people who can write and have interesting thoughts writing about Magic the Gathering, because there's a lot less people writing about Magic the Gathering these days than there There used to be. Has there been anything about writing about Magic that like kind of surprised you or you didn't anticipate? Either like in the pro or the con side, something you write about a lot, pros and cons. On the pro or the con side that has like really surprised you about, doing it.
It's like two things. So a pro is that it actually makes me a better Magic player by writing about Magic. It makes me think a lot more about decisions that I make in the game and decisions other players make in the game. I play in a pretty competitive pod, and I remember writing an article about something and being like, oh, I've been misplaying. I should, wait until this point to use my removal because I'm writing an article about removal and I'm picking other people's brains about it. Like, why do you always have it? Why does Josh Lee Kwai always have it? It's because he draws a lot of cards and he only interacts with things that kill him, right? Like it's like it made me a better player, right? And I've seen like growth since I started writing my articles. The con is I play so much Magic and I talk about Magic. I interact with Magic. I make Magic content, and I still will sit down to write an article and I'm like, what should I write about? There's so much stuff and so many different angles and getting to that 800 word limit is like minimum is like weird sometimes because I want to talk about something, but I only have 200 words on it. So I'm just going to make a TikTok instead.
I know that like, pushing for ideas part has always been the hardest part for me, honestly. Like I have a lot of ideas right now that I'm like kind of just don't actually have enough time to like work through, but that is not the problem that I usually have, especially when I was very consistently writing. Like there was a point in time when I was writing weekly for CCG Player and also writing like 1 to 4 articles a month for Commander's Herald at the same time. And during that time, I was kind of just like, a little dry for ideas. I was like, well, how much about Magic can one person really say? And then there's other times when I'm like, oh, we have so many things to say.
We're talking about this one mechanic in Magic that we never use.
Yep. I think the one thing about me that's always been so interesting is like, because it is such a long, drawn out process often, even if you're just writing something shorter or what have you, it is always amazing to me how much my thinking on something evolves or changes or is solidified by the act of thinking about it way more than I would have otherwise when I sit down to write about something. Or when you do write about something and you put it out there in the world like that, it usually is a much more fleshed out kind of, not argumentative, but opinionated type of thing than other pieces of content may be. And that often, in my experience, gets back a level of investment of like pushback or critique or agreement or conversation that a lot of other mediums of talking about Magic or any other hobby don't really get. Like when I podcast, when I used to do a lot of CDH stuff on YouTube, a lot of the comments you get are either like, wow, Bog, this is great, or like, holy shit, I hope you die, type of thing. But there's not really a lot of like people who are going to sit down and write a 10 paragraph response or whatever to your podcast episode or whatever. But like I released an article on Commander's Herald yesterday at the time of we're recording this. Yesterday. And I, as a fun exercise for myself, and it ended up turning into a 2-part article, classic, because the first part was 3,000 words, and I said, "Oh, the God, there's got to be a second part." I was trying to make like serious enough arguments, like in the for column and against column for every card on the Gamechanger list. Some of them way easier than others to make good arguments on both sides for. Turgrid, I literally couldn't make an against argument for. I just whatever. But the comments on that piece within even just a couple hours of it being live, there was several very insightful kind of bits of agreement, or agreement here, not agreement there. There was someone who wrote, I think, a very fair critique of my overarching piece, where they were saying that I wish I had taken some of the for or against arguments seriously. They were hoping to see one for every single one, and that maybe I could have tried a little bit harder, and I would agree with them. But I think that's it's something I think that, perfect is the enemy of good, blah, 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 blah. But That is a very interesting thing that always has surprised me about writing about Magic. Is like the level of investment that people put into responding to you seems to be like so much higher than other forms of content, at least in my experience.
Yeah, like I said at the top of the reason why I started writing articles, as every Magic player ever, we think that our ideas on Magic are the best. And I love that. I am very comfortable writing an article that people hate and they go to the comment section to like destroy me. I learned so much. They're like, people are like, no, you didn't consider this. You didn't consider this. And I was like, well, that's true. I didn't play Magic in 1993. It's important for me to know
you're
like,
right, yeah.
like how the format has changed. Like I very recently, I'm a Universe Beyond person. I like them, but I didn't really understand the argument against it. I didn't get it. And recently I watched a Spice 8 Rack video about it and was reading the comments, and I understood for the first time. I was just like, people really do have a reason to be feeling this way. And I didn't understand it for so long. And it came from people getting in the comments and writing about this stuff. And Spice 8 Rack's videos, their videos are basically video essays on this stuff. So hearing that Magic players are so invested in the game that they're willing to help their community by sharing their insights, I think is just powerful. And I love that about this community.
Me too, Cass. It's always nice to have opinionated people around to bounce off of.
Yes, you get stronger that way.
Well, Cass, we are incidentally running out of time. I don't know how that happened already because it feels like we've been talking for like 4 minutes. But of course, before we go, I'm going to ask you the Patreon exclusive question. What are your hobbies outside of Magic the Gathering? We'll get there. But as always, I have to ask you the other question that I ask everyone else. It's the last question. Is there anything else that you would love to leave the Herald Horn listening audience with?
Okay. It's okay to be wrong. I think that in the current climate, a lot of people are uncomfortable with the idea of admitting that when they're wrong or pointing out flaws in their own thinking. And I think that it's healthy for you to do that. It makes you stronger, it makes you smarter, it makes you more capable. We are not trying to beat each other when we argue. We're trying to learn. So I just think that people should stop being competitive and be wrong.
Cass, that was such a long-time English teacher response from you. I'm kidding. It
is. I've said it a lot in my classes.
Cass, thank you so much for joining me here on the Herald Horn. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You're a delight.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this conversation. This has been yet another Herald's Horn interview. I love having these. I'm glad that you are enjoying listening to them. If there is someone that you would love to have me talk to, feel free to reach out to me either on all my different social media accounts or an editorial at heraldshorn.com. I would love to get your email. Come back on Thursday for our normal Herald's Horn activities with the co-hosts, the product watch, the news, all that kind of stuff. And come back next Tuesday when I will be joined by Jacob and David, two relatively prominent and growing community artists who are putting on awesome panels at MagicCon focused on fun and art. Their doodle panels. We're talking about that next Tuesday. Can't wait to see you. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.